Hello and welcome to the fourth worked example video of the verbal reasoning section of the UCAT My EdSpace series. Today we're going to be looking at the final kind of free text question that tends to come up on the verbal reasoning section, which is logical reasoning. I'm Eleanor, I'm one of the teachers at My EdSpace, and I will be taking you through all of the content regarding the verbal reasoning section. Now, if you have seen any of the other videos in the series for verbal reasoning, you may have seen this already, but just to review what logical reasoning or evaluation questions they're sometimes called are asking you to do. They are asking you to evaluate arguments or assess how statements support or weaken a claim based on the passage you're given. So this type of question is asking you to evaluate, to see the relationship between pieces of information, to work out how effective something is, to work out how true something is or how likely something is based on the information in the passage. It's not due to your personal opinion, but rather to the information you're given. Remember, this exam contains no outside knowledge. You're not meant to have read any particular books or know about any particular topics in order to answer the questions. The expectation is it's all there in front of you. You may also be asked to judge the efficacy or strength of a piece of information or its weakness by its stated and measurable results. So based on the information, the cause and effects you can see related there, how strong is that piece of information? So this is what the questions might look like. What would strengthen the argument? What's also true? What's not true? What would weaken the argument? What best supports a statement, or what statement is best supported by the passage? What's the strongest argument for or against, or the most or least likely to support a statement you're given? These are some common pitfalls. You've seen some of these if you have seen any of the other content I've made for the UCAT. Mitigation and contradiction. This is crucial because, as we have said lots of times, time is your opponent in this section of the exam. So you won't be reading the passage in full. You'll be reading the questions and scanning the passage for keywords in order to answer them. But with keywords, you need to be mindful that you are not just seeing the word for the first time and thinking, okay, here's my answer, because it is very common that keywords are spread out across the passage so that you are forced to kind of skim the whole passage because later in the passage it may mitigate or contradict the presentation that appears earlier. So they may be guiding you towards that first section of the passage so that they can guide you towards an incorrect answer, and there are very commonly answers geared just toward that first perception in order to distract you. But you need to be mindful that you read or skim all the way through the passage and then ensure that you're reading the sentences around the keyword when it appears. Another pitfall is correlation is not causation. So oftentimes, unlike sort of naturally when you're reading and you read one sentence onto another and you kind of assume a link of some kind, in these passages, it is very likely and very usual trick to put two sentences together that seem related in some way, but actually are not cause or effect or not actually linked specifically. And this has led people to make the incorrect assumption based on the information they're given. If you assume that there's a link like cause and effect between one and the other. The way you can work around that is by looking for bridging phrases. So words like however, as a result of, due to, consequently, because then you know for a fact in the passage is indicating to you that there is a cause and effect relationship at play or some kind of link between the information in the two sentences. Don't make assumptions based that you can't support based on the information in the passage. It might seem logical to you in the real world to make that assumption, but the passage and the exam know that, and they are trying to assess if you can take the information you are given and make conclusions based on that in a logical way. So don't assume that just because two things are presented in the same passage, that they are actually linked or have anything else to do with each other. Juxtaposition kind of falls under the mitigation and contradiction. So are there two statements next to each other that seem linked but aren't necessarily? Be very mindful of that. Sometimes there are gaps in the information that require conclusions. So especially for the strength and weakness questions, or the most least likely, it might be that they present ideas that aren't quite word for word as they are in the passage, and you need to evaluate how they link to the passage and if you can conclude those statements based on the passage and based on the information. So that is a little bit tricky as well, but if you practice it, it becomes easier. With value judgments as well, you are sometimes given a bunch of pieces of information and forced to make a conclusion, or how effective something is in particular. You need to think about how you know it's effective and what effective looks like in this situation. And then again, avoid relying on outside information as it's there to distract you. Often the passages are made based on relevant contents, or some kind of content that you know about or are familiar with a little bit. Lots of sort of popular topics like the Titanic. You mentioned penicillin, about certain historical figures that people may know about, so may be able to speak more about in their life outside this exam. But be mindful that just because you know this piece of information from the outside world, you shouldn't bring it into the exam if it's not given to you, because it's not expected that you know it. So let's look at a practice question, a couple of practice questions actually, and think about how we can sort of practice the exam skills we are looking for. So first off, we're going to read the question. Question 1. Why might some hospital administrators favour increased cleaning over coatings? Okay, so I'm thinking with this word might appear infrequently, so it might be a good keyword. Maybe this idea of cleaning over coatings. So based on just a very brief scan of the first couple of sentences, it seems like the focus of the passage is on antimicrobial surface coatings. So we're going to be looking for something to do with their inefficacy compared to other options. So these are our options. Let's look to see if there's any other guidance we can find in the passage with them. Cleaning has no environmental drawbacks. Okay, so we're looking for words to do with the environment. Cleaners are more reliable than coatings, so we might be thinking about reliability as a reason. Cleaning is more effective at killing bacteria. Bacteria might be a good keyword here, though it might appear quite a lot in a passage about a medical environment. And the cleaning can provide similar benefits at a lower cost. Okay, so these are the reasons we're looking for as we skim through the passage. So as we are skimming, I'm seeing that the first paragraph has to do with how they're made and the fact that they are being piloted in hospitals. We're seeing the results in the second paragraph. And then here I'm seeing that the reductions in contamination are not always as positive as one might hope. As I'm scanning the third paragraph, I'm seeing the word administrator and reading this sentence and around it. So the first sentence I notice says cost effectiveness. I will keep that in mind as I keep reading. So are expensive to install, must be reapplied, maintained regularly. Some healthcare administrators question whether similar outcomes could be achieved with more frequent protocols at a lower cost. Others, however, important to take a look at this whole paragraph so that we know what the whole deal is. Others argue that in high-risk areas it may justify the investment, but we can see that this whole paragraph has to do with the cost of this, and this is where our administrators have come in. Let's keep scanning. Notice here another keyword from the question, environmental impact debated. But as we skim this paragraph, these are the people who are coming up as the proponents of this argument. So not the administrators, but rather manufacturers that have this concern. And then we keep reading. And again, we have another type of specialist with an opinion to hospital hygiene, provided they are used alongside cleaning protocols. Okay, so it seems like people are thinking about cleaning as an option rather than the coatings. Let's take a look at our answers now. A, cleaning has no environmental drawbacks. Well, that's not true, because we can see here that there are environmental drawbacks, but also that this is not the opinion of the administrators. So let's cross that one out. Cleaners are more reliable than coatings. Now, it seems in some cases that they are, because infection control specialists seem to think that that would be good if they have established cleaning protocols. For example, if there's a rota, and the administrators, as we said, think that they would be less of a cost, but it doesn't say anywhere that they are actually more reliable than the coatings, just that they might be cheaper, or environmentally better, or helpful in a mix of the two. Cleaning is more effective at killing bacteria. Okay, so we have quite a lot of information here about how effective the copper coatings are, but then again some mitigation of that. But we don't really have anything about the effectiveness of cleaning. This is where questions get a little bit tricky, isn't it? Because they are talking about the efficacy of killing bacteria, or the efficacy of the coatings, but if you're not mindful and thinking about this question is about the cleaning, then you might be steered towards the wrong answer. So I can't see anything here. It doesn't seem absolutely clear that it's more effective. At best, we have a suggestion it might be helpful. So this leads us to D. Let's check it out. Cleaning could provide similar benefits at a lower cost. This sounds like the information given here, where the administrators are mentioned, where cleaning can also be roughly as effective, but much cheaper. So our answer is D. Next question, same passage. Question 2, which of the following is a reasonable inference from the text? Okay, so we're looking for something we can conclude based on the information from the text. Okay, silver-based coatings are more effective. Environmental risks of silver, we know where that environmental section is, are still under scientific review. Synthetic coatings are banned in intensive care units. And infection control specialists fully support these coatings. Now, based on the scan we did previously, as we answered the question before, we know that the infection control specialists actually think that this is a multi-pronged approach with a qualifier here, right? Provided they are evaluated rigorously and used alongside, not instead of, established cleaning protocols. So this word here really does undermine what otherwise could be a good option here, because the infection control specialists don't fully support it, they somewhat support it. Or even if this word was completely crossed out and they just had infection control specialists support these coatings, that would be right. But we can't say they fully do, because they have mitigating factors that are important in order to give their support. So that one's not right, we know that. Let's take a look at some of the other words. We know that critical care units and intensive care units appear in these two paragraphs. So let's give a scan here. Okay, well, we can see that already this question can't be, or this answer can't be right, because synthetic coatings like copper have been used in critical care units. So we know that it can't be true that they're banned if they've been used in these studies. And also, the fact that they're being argued that they can be used in intensive care units and that would be actually the best place to use them because it would be the highest yield area and the highest risk area suggests that they are not banned. It might be true that they are banned, but based on the information in the passage, we can't say that they are. So we have to cross that one out too. Let's take a look at B. Environment, we know, is in this section here. The environmental impact is also debated. Silver can accumulate in ecosystems, been shown to harm. Manufacturers claim they're stable, but independent long-term studies are lacking. And then let's read around this bit. They remain an area of active research. So it seems definitely true that environmental risks of silver are still under review because they don't have enough long-term studies, as well as the fact that this is an area of active research still. So that means that this is still undergoing a process of research. So that sounds pretty good, but let's check the last one just in case. Silver-based coatings are more effective than copper-based ones. Okay. Let's take a little scan. Really, the only time we can see the distinction between copper or silver is here. And then as we keep scanning, we can't see very many other places where the difference between silver and copper is expanded. For example, the only time we can see that silver is being spoken about on its own is here, where they're talking about the environment. But that doesn't say that they have anything to do with the efficacy of silver versus copper. These are connected together, and though they're talking about some at some points and some at other points, because we don't have any information about how silver compares to copper, then we have to say that this cannot be true. We don't have enough information for us to state this. It may be true in the real world, but we don't have enough information to say so. So we're left with B. Environmental risks of silver are still under review. And that is our answer. Question 3. Which finding would most weaken the assumption? Okay, so already most weaken the assumption that antimicrobial coatings directly reduce infection rates. Now we know that this is an assumption, so we can't say for sure that it's true, but based on the information in the passage, what can we say that would weaken the idea that they reduce infection rates? So really we're looking for coatings not reducing infection rates, and that word directly is important because it suggests that that has an immediate effect on their own. Sometimes it is helpful to rephrase these for yourself. Oops, sorry. So that you don't get confused as you're talking and trying to work this out. So I find it helpful just to rephrase quickly, even if it's in your own mind. Rephrase a weaken or strengthen statement if it were a not or least likely statement, so that you know exactly what it is you're looking for. Okay, let's look at the answers and see what we can do from here, where we can go. Question 1 or option 1. Hospitals with antimicrobial coatings also employ more frequent hand hygiene protocols. Okay, they don't talk about hand hygiene in this passage. They do talk about a little bit about hygiene, we know here. And we know that they talk about cleaning, etc. further up here. cleaning protocols. There we go. Okay, so could we logically conclude this? Possibly, right? Because a lot of people are saying here that, or a lot of the experts saying here are that they need to be taken in tandem. And here as well, when we were talking about the study in which it was reduced, that the reductions in contamination are not always to do with the reduced infection rates, because they're in highly controlled environment and they're short term. So it might be likely that mitigating factors affected how much the surface contamination was reduced by the copper. And so we would have to think, okay, this might weaken the assumption that they directly reduce infection if people are also washing their hands at a higher rate and thus reducing infection in multiple ways at once. So that sounds maybe likely. Let's keep going. Some coatings are made with copper rather than silver. It seems like we know this is true, right? Some are made with copper, some are made with silver. So that seems true. Does that help? So this is a pitfall here, right? That seems true based on the passage, but does that most weaken the assumption that the coatings directly reduce infection rates? No, right? We have no proof that the fact that copper or silver has anything to do with the reduced infection rates. We know that copper has a 35% reduction, but wisely, or sneakily maybe, the exam writers did not include the percentage of the effect of reduction in silver coatings. So we cannot say that this would weaken the fact that coatings directly reduce infection rates. It's just a fact from the passage, which is why it might seem right to you, because if you're rushing in those 28.6 seconds to answer this question, you may see something that you know is right and circle it and move on, or click it and move on. But you have to be mindful of what the question is asking you. Infection rates in hospitals vary, depend on their size. Would that most weaken the assumption that antimicrobial coatings directly reduce infection rates? Maybe, right? If we're talking about the fact that infection, depending on size, means that the use of the copper coatings in different places, for example, in a big critical care unit, would make a difference compared to a smaller one, where there are different factors at play. But it doesn't seem like we can conclude it for sure, right? Because this doesn't seem like it would most weaken the assumption, especially compared with A. It seems like there's a part missing here that means that this C will not immediately reduce the idea that antimicrobial coatings directly reduce infection rates, right? It's just a kind of related somewhat fact. Patients in coated hospitals report higher satisfaction scores. Again, this is a tricky one, right? Because this might weaken the fact that the coatings reduce infection rate because people are happier with it, have higher satisfaction scores. But what are these satisfaction scores of, right? Are they to do with cleanliness? Are they to do with the hospital staff? Are they to do with the success rate for surgery? We don't know, right? So this is, again, too vague to get us straight to the fact that it directly reduces infection rates. We don't have enough information to conclude that because they have a high success score, that they will and have reduced infection rates. This is an example of correlation versus causation. These two things might happen at the same time, but that doesn't mean one caused the other. It doesn't mean that the reduced infection rates cause the higher satisfaction. So really, the only thing we're left with to prove this statement, to prove that coatings are not reducing infection rate on their own, is this one, right? Because this is the only one in which there is something else that might be helping to reduce the infection rates, that would affect how easily we could measure the efficacy of the coatings. That's the end of this worked example video. If you have any questions, please reach out and ask. And please, if you haven't already, take a look at the other videos. There's a lot of content there to help you. And there are also videos made for all of the different sections of the exam by my colleagues at My EdSpace, so that you can feel as prepared as possible for this very important exam that is very exciting for your future. Very good luck for when you take the exam, and until the next time, see you later.